The music world stands on the edge of chaos tonight. Breaking news has shaken the industry to its core, and the name on everyone's lips is King Harris. Once hailed as the next voice to define a generation, he now lies in a hospital bed, his future hanging by a thread. Doctors warn that even if he opens his eyes, the fire that made him unstoppable may never return. No stage, no mic, just silence. But beneath the tragedy, a darker story brews, whispers of altered reports, suppressed evidence, and a powerful machine determined to erase a rising star before he reaches his peak. Is this a medical disaster? Or a calculated takedown? The line between truth and deception is vanishing, and the battle for King Harris's legacy is about to begin. One thing is certain: the world will never be the same. The music industry has witnessed its share of heartbreaks, sudden losses, meteoric rises cut short, legends silenced before their time. But nothing could have prepared the world for the storm now engulfing the name King Harris. Once hailed as the future of hip-hop, a torchbearer destined to redefine the sound and soul of a generation. King now lies motionless in a hospital bed. The streets that once echoed with his voice are now filled with a single, terrifying question: will we ever hear him again? It all began as a whisper, a vague report about a medical emergency, a brief mention of hospitalization. Within hours, that whisper exploded into a global roar. Social media went into meltdown. Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram lit up with hashtags. Hashtag pray for King, hashtag justice for King, hashtag let him live. Fans flooded timelines with prayers, theories, and disbelief. The artist who embodied energy, rebellion, and lyrical fire was now silent, surrounded by machines that beeped steadily, each one a cruel reminder of life's fragility. Then came the news that turned fear into devastation. Anonymous sources within the hospital treating King Harris leaked what they described as a blunt, heartbreaking prognosis. Even if King regained consciousness, they said, his voice, the very essence of his artistry, might never return. No more verses. No more performances. The microphone that once roared with his passion could be silenced forever. For millions of fans, the thought was unimaginable. King's voice was more than a sound. It was a movement, a message, a force that united people across cultures and continents. To imagine a world without that voice was to imagine a future with one less heartbeat in the music world. But as the headlines spread and the world mourned, a darker narrative began to emerge. The official reports were grim to grim, some said. Rumors started swirling online. Medical results might have been altered, evidence suppressed, hope intentionally hidden. Anonymous hospital insiders whispered that certain test results, ones that hinted at potential recovery, had been buried under orders from above. A leaked voice note, allegedly from a nurse, claimed that staff had been told to declare King's prognosis hopeless. Regardless of what the scan showed, it was a chilling suggestion that King Harris's silence might not be the result of fate, but of design. At first, claims were dismissed as internet conspiracy, the kind of speculation that thrives in the chaos of celebrity tragedy. But then more evidence surfaced. A grainy video, allegedly recorded inside the hospital, appeared online. In it, two doctors could be heard whispering, "We've been ordered to say he's finished." The authenticity of the footage remains unverified, but its impact was immediate and explosive. The internet erupted. Comment sections became battlegrounds. Was this a medical tragedy or a calculated attempt to erase a rising star? Meanwhile, inside the hospital, heartbreak turned to despair. Witnesses described scenes of unimaginable grief. King's mother, Tiny, collapsed to the floor upon hearing the devastating prognosis, her screams echoing through sterile hallways. His father, known to millions as a figure of authority and dominance in hip-hop, reportedly punched the walls until his knuckles split open, a violent rhythm of rage and sorrow. King's siblings clung to one another, their cries a haunting soundtrack to a family's worst nightmare. The emotional devastation was undeniable, but so too was the growing suspicion. Some fans questioned the speed with which the hopeless narrative had been presented. Others pointed to inconsistencies in public statements from hospital officials. And then came the most damning revelation. Yet an alleged internal email leaked to reporters hinted that King's brain activity was showing signs of response, a detail nowhere to be found in the official updates given to the family or the public. By now, the story had grown far beyond a personal tragedy. It had become a global scandal. Protesters gathered outside the hospital demanding transparency. Fans launched petitions calling for independent medical evaluations. Influencers dissected every leaked image, every offhand comment, every possible clue. Rival artists issued statements, some supportive, others suspiciously cold. The hashtag fake reports trended worldwide as millions questioned whether they were witnessing a medical emergency or a deliberate cover-up. Yet, amid the storm of speculation, one truth remained painfully clear. King Harris's future, his life, his art, his legacy hung in the balance. The industry, too, began to feel the tremors. If the whispers were true, if there really were powerful forces seeking to bury a young artist's potential, what did that say about the state of music itself? Was King Harris just an unlucky victim of circumstance? Or was he a threat, a rising force whose talent, influence, and cultural impact had become too powerful, too uncontrollable for the powers that be? It was a question no one wanted to ask, but everyone was thinking. And as the hours turned into days, the mystery deepened. More leaks, more anonymous claims, more footage suggesting that the truth, whatever it was being hidden inside the ICU. The scene was both heartbreaking and surreal. The machines monitoring King's condition beeped in a steady, mechanical rhythm, as if mocking the silence that had replaced his once electric presence. His hands that had gripped microphones and ignited stages, now lay still, bound by 4 lines. His mouth, the instrument of his art, was silent beneath a respirator. And yet, to those closest to him, he was still fighting. Every flicker of a monitor, every slight shift in his vital signs, was a glimmer of hope. Outside, the world waited, argued, and speculated. Was this truly the end of King Harris, or the beginning of a much larger battle? And if the rumors of a cover-up were true, who stood to gain from his silence? Rival artists, industry executives, powerful figures terrified of a new king rising to claim the throne. For now, there were no answers, only questions. And one haunting reality, a voice that once echoed across the globe was now trapped in silence. Whether that silence was the result of tragedy or treachery remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. The fight for the truth had only just begun. In the aftermath of the initial shock, a new reality began to take shape, one far more sinister than anyone had imagined. What had once been framed as a devastating medical tragedy was now morphing into something darker. Something that looked less like misfortune and more like manipulation. And at the center of that storm stood King Harris, unconscious, voiceless, and possibly the victim of a scheme much larger than himself. As news of King's condition spread, inconsistencies started to emerge. At first, doctors told the family that his prognosis was bleak, and that even survival would come with significant neurological damage. Yet days later, leaked internal reports suggested otherwise. According to one anonymous nurse, early brain scans had shown unexpected responses, subtle, but significant indicators that King's condition might not be as hopeless as the official story claimed. Someone doesn't want the public to know, the nurse allegedly wrote in a message that quickly went viral. They're hiding the results. They're telling us what to say. This isn't medicine. This is manipulation. That message was just the beginning. Soon more leaks began to surface. Blurry footage from inside the hospital appeared online, allegedly showing 2 senior doctors in a private conversation. One voice, low and tense, could be heard saying, "We've been ordered to declare no hope. That's the directive." The other replied, "It's not ethical, but our hands are tied." Though the authenticity of the footage has never been verified, the damage was already done. Public trust began to crumble. Social media erupted with fury. Protesters gathered outside the hospital, waving signs that read, "Let King live and tell us the truth." The hashtag Stop the Cover-Up trended worldwide, and speculation about who might be pulling the strings grew more intense by the hour. The theories were chilling. Some believed record label executives, fearful of King's meteoric rise, were manipulating the narrative to eliminate competition. Others suspected rival artists with powerful connections, determined to stop the young star from dethroning them. A few even pointed to systemic corruption within the medical establishment, suggesting that financial incentives were influencing how King's prognosis was communicated. The deeper investigators dug, the murkier the story became. A leaked email allegedly sent by a hospital administrator to a senior staff member contained a line that set the internet ablaze. "Narrative consistency is key. We cannot allow contradictory information to circulate." Too many that sounded less like medical caution and more like deliberate control. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, the atmosphere had shifted from somber to suspicious. Staff members described an environment of fear and intimidation. "We're being watched," one anonymous source claimed. "Security cameras are everywhere. Conversations are monitored. People are terrified to speak." Another insider alleged that several employees who had questioned the official reports were abruptly reassigned or placed on leave. The Harris family, already shattered by King's condition, now faced a second nightmare. A maze of half-truths, contradictions, and unanswered questions. According to sources close to the family, King's father, known for his iron will and relentless drive, demanded independent evaluations from outside specialists. Yet those requests were repeatedly delayed, denied, or buried in bureaucratic red tape. "It's like they're trying to run out the clock," one family friend said. "They want to control every piece of information before it reaches the outside world." The more the family pushed, the more resistance they encountered. And as the cover-up narrative gained traction online, new pieces of evidence began to surface. A whistleblower who claimed to be part of the hospital's neurology department released a series of anonymized test results allegedly showing faint but consistent brain activity. "He's responding," the whistleblower wrote. "It's weak, but it's there. They're lying to everyone." These revelations reignited public outrage. Fans flooded social media with demands for transparency. Celebrity peers voiced support and called for an independent investigation. Even a few politicians weighed in, calling the situation deeply troubling and suggesting that corporate interference in patient care could amount to criminal misconduct. But the most explosive claim was yet to come. In a now infamous leaked audio clip, two unidentified individuals, believed to be senior figures within the music industry, were allegedly recorded discussing King's situation. One voice, chillingly calm, said, "We can't risk a comeback. If he recovers, he becomes unstoppable. It's better for business if the world believes he's finished." The author responded, "Then we control the story. Hope dies here." The clip spread like wildfire, shared millions of times within hours. While skeptics questioned its authenticity, the public had already made up its mind. This was no longer about medical prognosis, it was about power, control, and the silencing of a potential cultural revolution. For King's supporters, the theory made sense. In just a few short years, he had amassed a devoted following, music dominating streaming platforms, and his influence reshaping the landscape of modern hip-hop. Industry veterans had called him the future. Critics described him as the voice of a generation. His rise was meteoric and perhaps threatening to those who had spent decades at the top. If the whispers were true, silencing King wasn't just about stopping one artist. It was about maintaining an entire power structure, a hierarchy, that depended on keeping certain voices out of the spotlight. The question that now haunted fans, journalists, and investigators alike was chilling. If they could silence King Harris, who else could they silence? By the end of the second week, The battle lines were clear. On one side stood a grieving, defiant family, a furious fan base, and an increasingly skeptical public demanding the truth. On the other stood powerful, faceless forces hidden behind hospital walls, corporate boardrooms, and media narratives determined to shape the story to their advantage. And in the middle of it all lay King Harris, unconscious and silent, yet still the center of a storm that was only growing more violent with each passing day. What had begun as a tragedy was now a full-blown scandal, and the world was about to discover that the truth, whatever it was, would not stay buried for long. What began as a wave of confusion and grief was now a global outcry. The story of King Harris, once confined to hospital corridors and family statements, had exploded far beyond the walls of the ICU, across continents and cultures. Fans, activists, and industry insiders were rallying around a single, powerful demand: the truth by the third week of King's hospitalization. The situation had transformed from a medical crisis into a cultural reckoning. Millions of fans flooded the streets of major cities from Atlanta to London, Lagos to Los Angeles, carrying signs and chanting his name. Outside the hospital, barricades were lined with candles, posters, and handwritten, "Please let King live. Truth over power. We deserve answers." The movement wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. Online communities organized mass email campaigns targeting hospital administrators, demanding transparency. Hashtags like #JusticeForKing, #StopTheCoverUp, and #KingIsFighting trended for weeks, racking up billions of views and shares. Viral TikTok compilations documented every leaked clip, dissecting every second for clues. Twitter threads turned into investigative reports, piecing together a timeline of inconsistencies and suspicious decisions. The public had gone from passive spectators to active investigators, and they weren't alone. Independent journalists and watchdog organizations began launching their own probes into the situation. Medical ethicists raised alarms about the alleged suppression of test results. Legal experts questioned whether corporate influence could be interfering with patient care, a violation that, if proven, could lead to criminal charges. Even human rights groups weighed in, framing the situation as an issue of basic autonomy and transparency. One investigative report, published by a respected media outlet, made waves with a chilling claim: several members of the hospital's neurology team had attempted to resign rather than comply with unethical directives regarding King's care. According to the report, internal emails showed staff debating the morality of withholding information from the family, some warning that they could no longer participate in a deception of this magnitude. Meanwhile, the Harris family's frustration boiled over into public action. King's father, a man known for his resilience and authority, called a press conference outside the hospital, standing before a sea of cameras and flashing lights. He delivered a message that shook the industry. "We are not asking for special treatment. We are demanding the truth. My son is fighting, and we will fight for him. If anyone thinks they can silence him or us, they are mistaken. We will pursue every legal path, every investigative avenue, and every ounce of justice available." The statement electrified the movement. Fans cheered. Social media exploded, and the pressure on those allegedly controlling the narrative intensified. But the deeper investigators dug, the more alarming the discoveries became. In one leaked memo, reportedly from a major record label executive, the following line stood out: "If the narrative shifts, the entire rollout collapses. We must maintain the perception of permanent damage." Analysts quickly speculated that the rollout referred to the labels, slate of upcoming releases, artists who would face direct competition from King if he recovered. The implication was staggering. An artist's potential comeback could pose such a threat too. Profits that silencing him was considered a business decision. More disturbing still were the mounting reports of intimidation inside the hospital. Multiple anonymous staff members described being threatened with termination if they spoke to the media. Some claimed that their emails were being monitored. Others reported being followed or questioned after expressing concern about the official story. One whistleblower told reporters it's like something out of a movie. The moment you ask questions, they try to erase you. These revelations pushed the situation into the political sphere. Lawmakers began calling for formal inquiries into whether corporate interests were influencing medical decisions. Advocacy groups demanded hearings on patient rights and the power dynamics between healthcare institutions and the entertainment industry. Even the Department of Justice reportedly began monitoring the situation. Though no official investigation was confirmed, the response from the hospital was evasive. Spokespersons denied any wrongdoing, insisting that all care decisions were based solely on medical science. But their statements were vague, repetitive, and often contradicted by the mounting body of leaked evidence. Public trust plummeted. Polls showed that over 70% of respondents believed there was more to the story than officials were admitting. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, the Harris family refused to back down. Tiny, still recovering from repeated fainting episodes caused by stress, issued a tearful public plea. "They want us to believe there's no hope, but I see the signs. I see my son responding, and I will not let them bury him, not in silence, not in lies." Her words became a rallying cry. Fans shared them across every platform. Murals and street art featuring King's likeness began appearing in cities around the world, often with the phrase, "Hope lives here." Grassroots campaigns raised money to fund independent medical assessments, and a coalition of lawyers announced plans to pursue legal action against the hospital and any corporate entities involved. But even as the movement grew, so did the resistance. Suddenly, disinformation campaigns began to flood social media. Fake reports claimed King had suffered catastrophic brain death. Anonymous accounts pushed narratives that blamed King's own lifestyle choices for his condition. Gossip sites published unverified stories suggesting substance abuse or reckless behavior. Many saw this as a deliberate attempt to shift blame, to discredit the victim and redirect public attention. Still, the movement refused to be silenced. Every new smear only fueled the fire. Fans fought back with facts, sharing leaked documents and verified footage. Investigators continued to trace digital fingerprints, exposing fake accounts and potential links to PR firms with ties to major music conglomerates. The story had transcended the individual. King Harris was no longer just an artist fighting for his life. He had become a symbol of resistance against exploitation. A symbol of the struggle for truth in a world where profit often outweighs principle. And a symbol of hope for a generation that refuses to accept silence as the final word. As the protests grew louder, the investigations deeper, and the legal threats more serious, one thing became undeniable. The truth was coming, slowly, painfully, and against overwhelming resistance, but it was coming. And for those who had built their empires on control, deception, and manipulation, that truth could prove more devastating than any verse King Harris had ever written. The battle for King Harris's future had become far larger than anyone could have imagined. What started as a tragedy confined to a hospital room was now a global movement, a collision of power, truth, and rebellion, shaking the foundations of the music industry itself. As weeks turned into months, one thing became painfully clear. This was no longer just about one young man's health. This was about control, who wields it, how it's abused, and what happens when people refuse to bow to it. Inside the Harris family, resilience replaced despair. Every setback fueled their determination. Every leaked report, every anonymous tip, every whistleblower account only strengthened their resolve to expose the truth. T.I., known for his iron will, now channeled all his energy into a legal war. High-powered attorneys were hired, subpoenas were drafted, and lawsuits were prepared targeting not just the hospital, but also unnamed corporate entities allegedly influencing medical decisions. "We're done waiting," he said at a press conference. "We're taking this fight to the courtroom." Tiny, ever the heart of the family, became the emotional anchor of the movement. Her tearful pleas on social media turned into rallying cries for millions. "They want us to accept defeat," she told her followers, "but I see hope in every heartbeat. My son is still here. He's still fighting, and so are we." Her message spread like wildfire, igniting support from celebrities, activists, and fans alike. Meanwhile, Zanuck King's sister emerged as an unexpected force. Through her live streams, watched by millions around the world, she documented every development, the subtle movements in King's fingers, the slight flutter of his eyelids, the faint changes in his vital signs. "They're lying to you," she declared during one stream that reached over 2 million viewers. "He's fighting harder than they want you to know. They want you to believe it's over, but it's not." Her words resonated deeply. They turned despair into defiance, hopelessness into fuel. Fans around the world adopted a new rallying cry: "He's not done." At the same time, the legal and investigative pressure on those allegedly orchestrating the cover-up intensified. Media outlets released damning exposes linking certain executives to internal communications that discussed controlling the narrative around King's prognosis. Government officials hinted at potential investigations into corporate interference in healthcare, an unprecedented move that sent shockwaves through both the medical and music industries. Anonymous insiders continued to leak documents suggesting a pattern of deliberate misinformation, manipulated reports, and silenced dissent. Then came the moment that changed everything. A leaked video, clearer and more detailed than any before, surfaced online, recorded by an anonymous insider. It allegedly showed senior figures from a major record label meeting with hospital administrators behind closed doors. In the footage, one voice could be heard saying, "We can't let him back. If he recovers, everything changes. Too much power. Too much influence." Another voice responded, "Then we keep this story as it is. No hope, no comeback." The video spread across the internet like wildfire. Within hours, it was trending globally. Within days, it had triggered congressional inquiries, public protests outside corporate headquarters, and calls for resignations at the highest levels of the music business. The world was no longer just asking questions, it was demanding accountability. Amid this mounting pressure, whispers of hope inside the hospital grew louder. Several independent neurologists brought in by the family confirmed what fans had suspected all along. King's brain activity was not only present, it was improving. Slowly but steadily, his body was responding to stimuli. Movements, once non-existent, were becoming more frequent. Reflexes, once silent, were beginning to return. It was far from a full recovery, but it was enough to shatter the official narrative of permanent loss. When the news broke, the world erupted. Fans flooded social media with messages of triumph and renewed hope. Hashtags like #King is fighting, #Hope lives, and #They lied trended worldwide. Outside the hospital, the protests turned into celebrations. Crowds gathered with signs reading, "You tried to silence him, but the music lives on." The alleged cover-up, once dismissed as conspiracy, now looked frighteningly plausible. Lawsuits were filed, investigations deepened. Politicians called for sweeping reforms to prevent corporate influence from interfering with medical decisions. And the music industry, once untouchable, now faced a reckoning. But amid the chaos, the Harris family remained focused on the one thing that mattered most. King weeks later, in a moment that stunned the world. Surveillance footage from inside the ICU showed King moving his hand in response to his mother's voice. It was small, barely a twitch, but it was enough to bring the room to tears. "Did you see that?" Tiny cried. "He heard me. He's still here." Days later, another video surfaced. King's eyelids fluttering as his siblings spoke to him. It was hope, fragile, uncertain, but real. The narrative had changed forever. King Harris was no longer a story of tragedy. He was a story of resistance, of resilience, a family and a community refusing to let lies dictate destiny. And yet, as the world celebrated, questions remained. Would King ever rap again? Would his voice, the one that once moved millions, return? Or would his greatest impact be the movement he inspired, the system he exposed, the corruption he forced into the light? Whatever the answer, one truth was undeniable. King Harris had become more than an artist. He was now a symbol of truth against deception, hope against despair, and power against corruption. His fight had exposed the darkest corners of an industry and inspired millions to question the narratives they're fed. And even if his voice never roars through stadium speakers again, it has already changed the world in ways no song ever could. The story of King Harris isn't over, not by a long shot. In many ways, it's just beginning. The lawsuits, the investigations, the questions of accountability will continue. But more importantly, so will the hope. Every twitch, every blink, every breath he takes is a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the power of truth. And somewhere deep inside that hospital room, the young man who once commanded stages and captivated audiences is still fighting. Fighting for his voice, fighting for his legacy, fighting for a future that no amount of corruption, greed, or manipulation can ever take away. The story of King Harris is no longer just about one artist. It's about every voice that's been silenced, every truth that's been buried, and every dream that's been threatened by power and greed. What began as a tragedy inside a hospital room has become a global movement, a fight for transparency, justice, and the right to rise against all odds. And this fight is far from over. The question now isn't whether King Harris will rap again. It's whether we, as a community, will allow manipulation and corruption to dictate the future of art, music, and humanity itself. Will we let powerful forces decide who gets to rise and who is erased, or will we demand the truth? No matter how deeply it's hidden, this is where you come in. Your voice matters. Share this story with the world. Talk about it, post about it, debate it. Use your platforms, big or small, to amplify the demand for justice. Comment below and tell us what you believe really happened to King. Who do you think is behind the lies? And most importantly, do you believe he will rise again? Hit that like button if you stand with the fight for truth. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next update in this ongoing battle. And share this documentary with everyone, your friends, your family, your followers, because silence is exactly what those in power are counting on. King Harris's voice may be quiet for now, but together we can make sure his story is louder than ever. The fight for truth, justice, and legacy continues, and it needs you, and it needs you.